August 7th, I started my first shift at the last Blockbuster, hidden away near a remote camping site deep in the woods. The building looked like a relic from the past, faded blue and yellow colors, a sign barely hanging on, and a musty smell that hit you the moment you walked in. As soon as I stepped inside, I noticed a bulletin board behind the counter. There were several odd rules pinned to it. Don't touch the old VHS tapes, never stay after midnight, and always leave one light on. I thought it was some sort of prank for new employees. Who uses VHS tapes anymore? By the time I was halfway through my shift, things felt a bit off. The fluorescent lights above flickered randomly, and I kept hearing strange noises from the back room, like soft thuds or the sound of something shifting. I shrugged it off as an old building settling, but every time I glanced at the clock, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. As midnight approached, the store grew eerily quiet, almost as if the forest outside was holding its breath. I followed the rules, though. I made sure to leave the backlight on before closing, even though I felt silly doing it. The next morning, my older coworker, Carla, came in to relieve me. She looked at me with a smirk. "How was your first night?" "Hope you didn't mess with the tapes," she said. I laughed it off, but her expression shifted to something more serious. "I'm not joking," she added. "There's a reason for those rules." Her words lingered in my mind for the rest of the day, and as much as I tried to shake it off, I couldn't help but feel that something was wrong with that place. Maybe the rules weren't just there for show after all. I decided to keep my head down and follow the rules, but curiosity got the best of me. That night, after closing up, I couldn't resist peeking into the back room. I didn't touch anything, just observed. Old VHS tapes were stacked on dusty shelves, untouched for years. One tape in particular caught my eye. A blank label with no title, sitting slightly off-center from the others. I reached out, but stopped myself. Something told me it wasn't worth the risk. Maybe Carla was right. Some rules weren't meant to be broken. The following night, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung over me like a dark cloud. I kept thinking about that blank VHS tape, the way it seemed out of place, almost as if it was waiting for someone to notice it. But I was determined to follow the rules. Midnight was approaching again, and I was already on edge. The store felt different after dark, quieter, colder. The usual hum of the lights seemed distant, almost like it had faded into the background. At 11:45 p.m., something strange happened. The lights flickered again, but this time, it wasn't random. They dimmed in a rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. I stood frozen, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a soft creak coming from the back room. My heart raced as I glanced toward the door. It was slightly ajar, even though I was sure I had closed it earlier. I took a deep breath, telling myself it was just the old building playing tricks on me. But then, I saw it. A shadowy figure in the corner of the store, just out of my peripheral vision. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It was just there, watching me. I blinked, trying to focus, but when I turned my head to get a better look, it was gone. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood there, trying to convince myself that it was nothing more than a trick of the light. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, something that shouldn't be there. I grabbed my things and hurried to lock up for the night. As I walked toward the door, I felt that familiar knot tightening in my stomach again. The forest outside seemed darker than usual, almost as if the trees themselves were closing in on the store. I glanced back one last time before stepping out, and there it was again, the shadow, lurking in the back of the store, just barely visible. This time, I didn't stop to question it. I locked the door and rushed to my car, refusing to look back. The next morning, Carla noticed my pale face and shaky hands. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked, her voice low. I hesitated but nodded. She sighed, looking away as if she was disappointed but not surprised. "I warned you. Don't break the rules, kid. This place, it has a way of keeping you in line if you don't." After that night, the atmosphere inside the store shifted. It was as if the air was heavier, more oppressive. Every time I walked past the back room, I felt an inexplicable pull, like something was trying to draw me inside. I kept to the rules, never staying after midnight, never touching the VHS tapes. But that shadow, it stayed with me, lurking in my thoughts, haunting my dreams. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I had seen wasn't done with me yet. One evening, curiosity got the best of me. I knew I shouldn't, but I couldn't resist. I snuck into the back room, determined to take a closer look at that blank VHS tape. The air in the room was stale, like it hadn't been touched in years. Dust coated the shelves, and the old tapes sat silently, almost as if they were waiting for someone to notice them. My hands trembled as I reached for the blank tape. The moment I touched it, the room seemed to grow colder, and the lights flickered again. I popped the tape into the old VCR in the corner, my heart pounding. The screen crackled with static before an image slowly came into focus. It was a grainy video of the Blockbuster store, but it was different. The shelves were stocked with movies that looked ancient, and the employees wore uniforms from another era. But what caught my attention was the shadowy figure, the same one I had seen in the store. It stood silently in the background, just watching as the employees went about their work, unaware of its presence. The video jumped forward, and I saw another employee, one I didn't recognize. They were closing up for the night, just like I had been doing. But then, the shadow moved. It crept closer and closer until it was right behind the employee. Suddenly, the screen went black. My breath caught in my throat as the tape rewound itself, then ejected from the VCR on its own. I sat there, frozen, my mind racing. Who were these people? And what had happened to them? That's when I heard it. A soft creak coming from the doorway. I turned slowly, and there it was, the shadow, standing in the entrance to the back room. This time, it wasn't just lurking in the corners. It was right there, as clear as day. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the truth. This thing wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was real, and it was coming for me. I couldn't move. The shadowy figure stood there, a dark, undefined shape that seemed to suck the light out of the room. I felt the cold creeping over me, the air thick with dread. My heart raced, and all I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. It didn't move, but somehow I knew it was waiting for me to do something, to break another rule. I forced myself to take a step back, my legs shaking beneath me. Suddenly, I heard Carla's voice from behind me. "Don't turn your back on it," she whispered urgently. I hadn't even heard her come in. I didn't dare look away from the shadow as she stepped into the room. "It feeds on fear," she said, her voice steady. "It's been here longer than the store itself. The rules, they're not just guidelines. They're the only thing keeping it at bay." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "What do we do?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. Carla stepped closer, holding up a small, worn book. You need to follow the rules to the letter. No exceptions. If you don't, well, you've seen what happens. She glanced at the VHS tape and the VCR, her expression grim. Those people broke the rules, and now they're trapped here. The shadow watches them forever. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that the employees in the video weren't just missing. They were still here, bound to the store, hidden in the shadows. Carla handed me the book, and I could see that it was filled with notes from past employees, all of them warning the same thing: never break the rules. I clutched the book tightly as the shadow began to fade, slowly retreating into the corner of the room. Carla let out a sigh of relief as the room grew warmer again. As long as you respect the rules, it won't hurt you, she said quietly. I nodded, still shaken. From that night on, I never stayed past midnight, never touched the VHS tapes, and always left one light on. The strange occurrences stopped, and the shadow never returned. I continued working at the Blockbuster for a few more months until the store finally closed its doors for good. I never told anyone about what happened there, and I never broke the rules again. The last night I worked, as I locked the door for the final time, I glanced back one last time. The store was empty, quiet, but I could have sworn I saw a shadow flicker in the corner of my vision. But this time, I didn't stop to investigate. I just walked away, grateful to be free from the strange and unsettling presence that had once haunted me. Some rules, I learned, are there for a reason, and some mysteries are better left unsolved. August 20th. I had been working the night shift at the last Blockbuster for a few weeks now. The store was located near a summer camp, tucked away in the middle of nowhere. There were always strange rules posted on the employee board, but I had learned to ignore most of them. Until one night, I was alone in the store, and the phone rang. I checked the clock. It was 3:15 a.m., well past the cutoff for rentals. One of the rules said no movies were to be checked out between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. But who could resist picking up the phone when the silence was so thick you could hear your own heartbeat? I answered, and the voice on the other end was distorted, like it was coming through a bad connection. "Do you have The Shining?" the voice asked. My skin prickled. Something about the way they said it made the air feel colder. I hesitated but managed to respond. "We're closed for rentals until 4 a.m., I said. The voice didn't reply for a moment, and then it repeated, "Do you have The Shining?" This time it was softer, but more demanding. I felt a chill run down my spine, but before I could respond, the phone went dead. The line was completely silent, like it had never been connected in the first place. I hung up, my hand trembling slightly. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just a prank call. But as I turned back to the counter, the room felt different. The lights dimmed for a split second, and the shadows in the aisles seemed longer, darker, like they were stretching toward me. I checked the security cameras, hoping to distract myself. But when I scanned through the footage, something was wrong. The timestamp glitched out during the time I had been on the phone. It skipped from 3:15 to 3:25 in an instant, as if those 10 minutes had just vanished. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. What was going on here? The next few nights passed uneventfully, but I couldn't stop thinking about that call. The distorted voice, the missing footage, it haunted me. I even checked the store's rental records, but there was no request for The Shining that night. It was as if the call had never happened. Still, the strange rules stayed in my mind. No movies after 3 a.m. Always leave one light on. Things that seemed absurd on paper now had a darker weight to them. On August 23rd, just past 3 a.m., I was shelving some returned DVDs when the lights in the store flickered again. This time, it wasn't just a random blip. The lights dimmed to almost nothing before flaring back to life. I felt a pressure in the air, like the atmosphere had suddenly become too thick to breathe. I looked around the store, expecting to see something, anything, but everything seemed normal. That was until I heard a soft scraping sound coming from one of the aisles. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. The scraping grew louder, like something was being dragged across the floor. I cautiously stepped toward the source of the noise, my hands trembling. As I turned the corner into the horror movie section, I saw it. One of the VHS tapes was sliding off the shelf on its own. It fell to the floor with a soft thud, and I stood there, staring at it. The label was old and faded, but I could make out the title, The Shining. A wave of cold washed over me. There was no logical explanation for what I had just seen. I bent down to pick up the tape, my hand shaking. As soon as I touched it, the air grew even colder, and the lights dimmed again. I looked around frantically, expecting the shadows to move, expecting something to appear in the darkness, but nothing did. I quickly shoved the tape back onto the shelf and backed away, trying to steady my breathing. When I returned to the counter, I glanced at the security footage again. My stomach dropped. Just like before, there was a glitch. The timestamp skipped over the exact moment the tape had fallen. It was as if the cameras had deliberately blacked out that moment. I couldn't explain it, but I knew one thing for sure. The rules weren't just there for show. Something, or someone, was watching, and I was breaking the rules. After that night, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was wrong. It was like the store itself had eyes, watching my every move. I avoided the horror section altogether, unwilling to touch The Shining again. But no matter how much I tried to forget, the memory of that distorted voice, the missing time on the footage, and the VHS tape haunted me. Every time I walked through the store, the shadows seemed darker, and the air felt thicker, like something was closing in on me. On August 25th, the phone rang again at exactly 3:17 a.m. My blood ran cold as I stared at the receiver, dread pooling in my gut. I didn't want to answer it, but something compelled me to pick up. The line was filled with static at first. Then the same distorted voice spoke, as calm and eerie as before. "Do you have The Shining?" it asked. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to speak. "We don't check out movies after 3 a.m., I said, my voice trembling. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear the faint sound of breathing through the static. Then, the voice spoke again, slower this time. "You broke the rules, didn't you?" My breath caught in my throat. The voice was right. I had touched the VHS tape, and I had been staying past 3 a.m. when I wasn't supposed to. My pulse quickened as the lights flickered once again, plunging the store into momentary darkness. When the lights came back on, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I slowly lowered the phone, my hand shaking uncontrollably. The store was silent, but it didn't feel empty. I couldn't explain it, but I knew something was there, watching me from the shadows. I glanced around, searching for any movement, but the aisles were still. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me, unseen but ever present. I hurried to the front of the store, trying to ignore the growing panic in my chest. As I approached the counter, I noticed something strange. The security cameras were all off. The screens were black, except for one. The only active camera was focused on the horror section, where The Shining sat on the shelf. My stomach twisted into knots as I stared at the screen. In the dim light, I could make out the faint outline of a figure standing motionless in front of the VHS tape. But when I looked toward the actual aisle, it was empty. I stood frozen, staring at the security screen. The figure on the monitor didn't move, but it was undeniably there, shrouded in shadow. I blinked hard, hoping it was just a trick of the light, but the shape remained, still as a statue. My heart raced, and I could feel the sweat gathering on the back of my neck. There was no one in the aisle. I had checked, but on the screen, the figure was as real as anything else in the store. I grabbed my phone and dialed Carla's number. The line rang and rang, but there was no answer. My fingers were trembling so badly that I nearly dropped the phone. I kept glancing back at the monitor, the figure looming over The Shining. Finally, I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait around to find out what would happen next. I was getting out of there. I rushed toward the front door, my feet pounding against the floor as I grabbed the keys to lock up. But just as I reached the door, the lights in the store went out completely. Darkness swallowed me whole, and I was left standing in the pitch black. My heart was beating so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I fumbled for the light switch, my hands brushing against the walls, searching desperately. Then, from somewhere deep in the store, I heard the faintest sound, a whisper. "You broke the rules." I didn't wait to find out what was coming next. I bolted for the door, throwing it open and running out into the cold night air. I didn't stop until I reached my car, panting and trembling. When I looked back at the store, the lights had returned and everything appeared normal. But I knew it wasn't. Something was still inside that Blockbuster, bound by those strange rules. I never went back, and to this day, I still don't know who or what called me that night. But I do know one thing. Some rules are meant to be followed, no matter how strange they seem. September 15th. I had taken the job at Blockbuster to save money before heading off to college. The store, nestled in the woods near a camping site, seemed like the perfect way to pass the quiet nights. The rules, though strange, didn't bother me much, until I broke one. We weren't supposed to stay after 9 p.m., but I'd gotten behind on cleaning. The night was quiet, the only sound coming from the distant rustling of the trees outside. As I mopped the floor, the clock ticked past 9:15 p.m. I figured a few extra minutes wouldn't hurt. But then, the atmosphere in the store shifted. It was subtle at first, like the air had grown heavier, thicker. The lights flickered briefly, and I paused, looking around. Nothing seemed out of place, but an uneasiness settled deep in my chest. I told myself I was being paranoid and continued with the cleanup. That's when I heard it, the faint sound of whispering. It was so soft, I almost convinced myself I imagined it, but then it grew louder. It wasn't coming from the aisles. It was coming from the back room. My heart pounded in my chest as I set down the mop and cautiously approached the door. I knew I shouldn't investigate, but my curiosity overpowered my fear. I slowly opened the door, and the whispering stopped. The back room was dark and empty, but it felt colder than the rest of the store. I turned to leave, but the door suddenly slammed shut behind me. Panic surged through me as I tried to yank it open, but it wouldn't budge. My breath quickened, and I could feel the weight of something in the room with me, though I couldn't see it. The darkness seemed to press against me, suffocating and oppressive. I banged on the door, desperate to get out, but all I could hear was that same whisper, growing louder by the second. I pounded on the door, my hands trembling as fear gripped me tighter. The whispers in the room became clearer now, almost like a chorus of voices surrounding me. They weren't speaking words I could understand, just a low, eerie murmur that made my skin crawl. I turned around, searching the darkness for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. Only the cold, empty blackness that seemed to grow thicker with every passing second. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, but they were dimmer than before. I could make out the shelves stacked with old VHS tapes, each one covered in a thin layer of dust. I tried the door again, and this time, it creaked open. My heart was still racing as I stumbled back into the main part of the store. Everything looked the same, but the atmosphere had changed. It felt like I had stepped into another world, one where I didn't belong. I grabbed my things, ready to leave. But as I made my way to the front door, I noticed something strange. A single VHS tape sat on the checkout counter. It hadn't been there earlier. The label was worn, and the title was barely legible, but I could just make it out. Don't look back. I hesitated for a moment, a cold chill running down my spine. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but something about the tape drew me in. Against my better judgment, I reached for it. The moment my fingers touched the tape, a cold shiver ran through my entire body. I quickly pulled my hand away, feeling a wave of nausea wash over me. I glanced around the store one last time before bolting out the door, leaving the tape behind. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, lurking just beyond my vision, waiting for me to break another rule. The following nights were tense. Every time I entered the store, the silence felt suffocating, the air thick with a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. September 20th had come and gone, but the strange occurrences hadn't. I avoided staying past 9 p.m. and refused to go near the back room, but the store felt different now. It was as if something had changed that night, like I had crossed a line by staying late and touching that VHS tape. One night, as I was closing up early, the power flickered again, plunging the store into near darkness. I froze, listening. The whispering had returned, faint but insistent. It came from every corner of the store, surrounding me. I stood still, my breath shallow, as the temperature dropped rapidly. I didn't dare move, didn't dare make a sound. Then from the darkness, a voice broke through the whispers, clear and sharp. Don't look back. My blood ran cold. I spun around, my eyes darting across the aisles, searching for the source of the voice. But there was no one there. The store was empty, yet the voice had been so close, like someone had whispered it directly into my ear. My heart pounded as I grabbed my things and hurried to the front door, determined to leave as quickly as possible. But just as I reached for the handle, I felt it, a presence behind me, looming, watching. My instincts screamed at me not to turn around, to just leave and never look back. But the pull was too strong. Slowly, against every ounce of fear in my body, I turned. For a brief second, I saw it. a shadowy figure standing in the middle of the store, its outline blurry but unmistakable. Then the lights flickered back on, and the figure was gone. I bolted out the door, not caring if I locked up or left anything behind. I knew, deep down, that the rules had been broken, and something had been unleashed. After that night, I couldn't bring myself to return to work. Every time I thought about the Blockbuster, a cold dread washed over me, filling me with the same fear I had felt when I saw the figure. But the job paid well, and I needed the money for school. So on September 28th, I reluctantly decided to go back for one final shift. I told myself it would be quick. Just clean up, close early, and never return. The store was eerily quiet when I walked in, almost too quiet. It felt like the building was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I moved quickly, keeping my head down and ignoring the unsettling feeling in the air. As I worked, I caught sight of something that stopped me dead in my tracks. On the counter, where I had left it days before, was the same VHS tape, "Don't Look Back." Only this time, the label had changed. Scrawled across it in red ink were the words, "You should have listened." My heart raced as I grabbed my things, determined to leave once and for all. But as I approached the front door, the lights flickered, and the store was plunged into darkness. The whispers returned, louder and more frantic than before. I stood frozen, clutching my bag, my breath coming in short gasps. The shadows in the aisles shifted, moving closer, and I felt the presence again. Stronger this time, more menacing. I didn't need to turn around to know it was there. The air grew colder, and I could feel it, right behind me, waiting. I closed my eyes, willing myself to move, but my legs wouldn't budge. Then, just as suddenly as the darkness had come, the lights flickered back on. I opened my eyes and found myself standing alone in the store, the whispers gone, the shadows still. But something was different. The store felt emptier, as if whatever had been there had finally claimed what it wanted. I never went back to Blockbuster after that. I quit the next morning, and I moved away from town shortly after. But every now and then, when I'm alone in a quiet room, I hear those same whispers, faint and distant, reminding me of the rules I should have never broken. And I know, deep down, that whatever I unleash that night is still out there, waiting for its next victim.